Angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Oprah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? When they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian.' The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go in strength, in the strength you have, and save Israel out of Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?' 'Pardon me, my Lord,' Gideon replied, 'but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family.' The Lord answered, 'I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive.' Gideon replied, 'If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you.' And the Lord said, 'I will wait until you return.'" You may have your seat. Today, I want to speak to you from the topic, I am enough. I am enough. Family, I know that in the recent headlines that the news has left many of us feeling as if we do not have the ability or the capabilities to make an impact into the world that is happening right now. Alone in 2022, we have already seen that there has been 214 mass shootings that have happened in our country. This is on par to exceed the mass shootings that have happened in 2021, which was a count of 222. It can allow you to feel as if it is hopeless for you to hope in the world that we're living in. In our current situation, we see that racism is still rearing its ugly head. We still see that poverty is still rearing its ugly head. We still see that there are people who are not able to seek refuge in a country that is supposed to be a refuge place for others. It can lead you hopeless. It can lead you asking the question, what can I do? But like Gideon, I am here today to tell you that you are enough. The problems that we have today are not an indication that you are not a part of the solution. In fact, they are an indication that you were born to help be a part of the solution. Because you are enough. And so I am here today to have a conversation with you to inform you that you are enough. It's a conversation that is necessary for us because I would argue that one of the primary areas in which the enemy manipulates us in our assessment of our own value is in getting us to think that we have no value at all. It is a conversation that is necessary because this conversation will help us better understand our theos, which is our understanding of God, which then impacts our logos, which is our logic and our reasoning around God, which then will help us better walk it out in our pathos, which is how we walk and execute ministry. But then it will also help us elevate our ethos, which helps us understand why we do what we do. You see, you cannot have a foundation, a solid foundation of having a solid theos, logos, pathos, or ethos if you first don't understand that you yourself are enough for the current situation. And so we're going to have this conversation because we see that this is a conversation that is necessary and has been had throughout history. As a matter of fact, I eavesdropped on a conversation that God had with a man by the name of Moses. You may have heard of Moses. Moses, the prophet. Moses, the one that was born as a Hebrew, but then had the opportunity to live in the palace. The one that sat next to royalty, but was never considered to be royal. You may have heard of Moses, the one that said to God, I cannot lead your people out of the promised land because I stutter. You may have heard of Moses, the one whose people actually called him a murderer when he was just standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. And when you understand that you are enough, you will understand why God tells Moses in Exodus that even though you are slow of speech, I can still use you. And I need to ask the question, is there someone in here that you doubt yourself so much, but God has been speaking to you and saying, even though you doubt yourself, I can still use you. Even though you think your position at work is insignificant, I can still use you. Even though you think that you are the least in your entire family, I can still use you. Even though your finances aren't necessarily where you want them to be, I can still use you. And if you're willing to be used, I need for you just to sit back and self-reflect and tell yourself, I am enough. Because what the enemy wants to do is to get you to think that you have no value, that you have no worth, that you're a mistake. But I came here today to tell you that just like God told Moses, I am telling you that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, is still the God of our present tense right now and our future tense tomorrow. And that God that pulled the Israelites out of Egypt can pull us out of the current situation that we're in. But we don't just serve a God that does the work for us. We serve a God that revels in our partnership. And if you're willing to be a partner with God, then you have to also be willing to identify that you are enough, because nobody wants to be partnered with someone that doesn't see their own value in themselves. You are enough. This is a conversation that is so important because we see what happens when people in the scriptures don't understand that they are enough. We saw it when we had a king by the name of Ahab. Ahab had all that he could possibly want. But then he looked out his window one day and saw that this man had a vineyard that he really wanted. And instead of letting the man keep what was his, Ahab said, I want that for myself. Well, Ahab, why do you want someone else? What someone else has? Have if you're enough. Well, Ahab suffered from what is called imposter syndrome. Ahab followed behind David. But then Ahab could never be David because Ahab didn't have the heart of David. And what does it do when you desire to be something someone else, have something that someone else has, but you don't have the character to uphold the mantle that that person has to do it? You have to understand that the portion that God has given you is just enough for you, because we serve a God that is a God of equity and equality. Equity meaning that God will give you enough for you in the current season, but in equality, a God that wants everyone to feel valued, justified, and defended. We serve a God of the and not a God of the or. And if you don't have it right now, that means that you may not be able to actually use it in the way that God intends for it to be used. And so don't be an Ahab, try and be a David, and say, whatever portion you give me, I'll take it because it's enough for me. You need to understand that I am enough. We also see that when you don't have it, you do make the mistake of hurting those, as Cain did with his brother Abel in the Old Testament. Cain didn't have a clear understanding of what sacrifice actually meant. He thought sacrifice meant just bringing the number that God required to the offering table. But we know that scripture tells us that Abel brought it with the heart of thanksgiving. We know that scripture tells us that Abel brought his first fruit, right? And so what Cain did, he made that misassumption that God didn't value his testimony, that God didn't value his sacrifice, and really God didn't value the way that his heart was placed. And what you have to understand is that when you understand that you are enough, you understand that God can work with your scraps just as much as he can work with your abundance. And it allows you to go with an open heart to God and say, God, this is all I have, but use what you have. You understand that you're not little, that you're mighty. And so when God says, oh, come here, my mighty warrior, you no longer say, who, me? You say, yes, me. And so what I want you to do is understand that we are having this conversation that you are enough because it's an important conversation. Because not only in scripture have we seen that it's a conversation that God has had to have with people, we see in modern times that it is a conversation that God has had to have with people. If I had to eavesdrop on several conversations, I would say that Sojourner and Harriet had the conversation. I would say that Frederick Douglass had the conversation. I would say Martin and Malcolm had the conversation, because if you're going to be a liberator and an emancipator, if you're going to go against and try and break down systems of oppression, then you have to understand that when everyone else says that you're not valued, that you too are enough despite what everyone else says. And what I need to know, is there anyone here that is willing to step in the gaps for everyone, for those that cannot stand up for themselves, for those that are in need of protection, because you say, I am enough. And despite whatever challenges come my way, God, I am willing to say yes, because you can use me, because you don't create no mess. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. And it's important that we understand this, because those who are waiting on us to live out our purpose need us first to embrace that God has created us to be enough for our current situation. And so, in our scripture today, we are in the book of Judges. Judges is the 7th book of the Bible. It transitions us from the Exodus narrative of where God has continued to show mercy and grace. He has done what God has said he's going to do, and he pulls his chosen people, Israel, from the hands of the captors, or the captives, the Egyptians. And the interesting thing about Judges is that it picks up after Joshua. It picks up after the children of Israel have taken the promised land, but forgotten the God that has given them the promise. It picks up after the children of Israel have taken the promised land, have gone through years of agony, have gone through years of suffering, have gone through years of complaining, have seen miracle after miracle, testimony after testimony, but have now forgotten the God that brought them through their moment of vulnerability. And in Judges, what we see is, Judges is interesting because it is the response that God has to Israel wanting to be like all of the other nations around them. God says, don't worship any other gods around me, outside of me. Israel worships all the other gods. God says, don't take on the same values of the cultures that are surrounding you. Israel takes on the values and the cultures of the others surrounding them. God says, you don't need kings to tell you what you need to do with yourself. Israel says, give us a king. The book of Judges is difficult because it is the book where we see God forcing Israel to work through their problems of disobedience with their own hands. It's not a book where God is absent. It's just a book where God is not doing the work for them. And if we're honest, we live in a society and a time right now where we have marveled and been witness to God being the God of provision, to God helping us in our dire times of need. But perhaps, like Gideon and the children of Israel, we're in a time now where God is saying, I'm here, but it's time for you to do the work yourself.
That's good.
You want changes and reforms? Do the work yourself. You want to stop there being people that are hungry on the streets? Do the work yourself. You want your finances to balance out in your personal account? Do the work yourself. Because how many times have we blamed God for situations that really are our fault and not God's? And we've talked about this, that love without accountability is tolerance. And we serve a God that says, I love you, which means that we serve a God that holds us accountable. And if we don't want the situations to keep occurring, like we have seen happen time and time again, if we are truly tired of the things going wrong in our society, if we are truly tired of systemic oppression, if we are truly tired of bigotry and racism, if we are truly tired of any other ism that you can name, then it's time for us to stop always praying to God. It's time for us to pray to God and do the work. But for us to really be effective in doing the work, it requires us to recognize that we are enough. That we are enough. And it's okay. I don't expect a lot of amens, because you don't get a lot of amens when you're telling the truth most times. I would feel much better if after this sermon you went out and hit the streets and took money out of your pocket and gave it to someone who was in need on the corner, because we pass by them every single day on Route 24 or Route 40. I will be much more excited if you went and you talked to your neighbor that you disagreed with and helped them understand why the things that they say and the flag that they have on their car is not just damaging to you, but damaging those around you.
Yes.
I would be much more excited if you are willing to take yourself out of a position of comfort and be be uncomfortable for a few moments, and instead of saying, my, what can I do? What do I need? What more do I need for myself? If you go out and you look and you say, what resources can I give within the community? Because change doesn't always happen in leaps and bounds. Change happens in incremental steps. And we are a church that values change. We are a church that lives on the values of Christ-centered justice. And what does that mean? It's very simple. It's justice that puts Christ in the center. It means that the way that we try and handle the system is we first use Scripture as our guide to help us understand which part of the line to be on, but then it also allows us to have the lens to recognize that some decisions have a greater impact than just me. It's a heart posture. And if you're going to be a part of this community, we need for you to understand that you are a part of a community that desires to always be on the Christ side of justice. But first, you've got to understand that you are enough. And why am I harping on this you are enough for so long? I'm harping on it because when you see yourself as insignificant, when you see yourself as not being relevant, when you see yourself as not having an important part to play, then you get into the place of being stagnant. And you get into the place of being a complainer and never a solution maker. You allow other people to make the decisions about how you should live your life on a day-to-day basis instead of you being actively engaged in the way that you live your life today and tomorrow. And what I need to know, is there anyone in here that's tired of letting other people make the decision for you on what is right and what is wrong? Instead, you're ready to start leaning on the side that is Christ-centered. It's an important decision. It's an important question for you to understand and make up for yourself. Which side of justice are you going to be on? The Christ side or the other side? You are enough. And so, here's what we see in this. Gideon is out there. And the angel of the Lord comes to him and says, "You mighty warrior." And Gideon responds to God and says, "Who, me? Who, me?" How many times have you said, who me? How many times have you said, who me? When you saw the person being mistreated, who me? You didn't take the shots, but you felt the shots. Who me? You knew someone didn't get paid what they were supposed to get paid. Who me? You saw that person get arrested wrongly. Who me? We had a difficult decision. Well, not even we. I had a difficult decision to make about a month ago about whether or not I would be a pastor that just spoke what was palatable, or if I decided to start speaking what was true. And it's a difficult situation sometimes because we have a diverse congregation. But the reality is that me being palatable means that my son may not wake up tomorrow. You being palatable at work means that someone may not be able to feed their kids tomorrow. And what you've got to understand and decide is, like Gideon, you too are a mighty warrior. Like Gideon, God has chosen you for this season and for this time. Like Gideon, you have the resources and the tools at your disposal. Because like Gideon, no weapon formed against you should prosper. Here's the important thing to remember about, to understand about this verse in Judges. So we're talking about the Midianites. The Midianites were not strong enough to defeat Israel on their own. Let me say this again. The Midianites were never strong enough to defeat Israel on their own. As a matter of fact, the Midianites were so small that they had to go around and convince other people to join into them when they decided to raid Israel. And so what they were able to do, they were able to use psychological warfare to get Israel to think that they were weaker than what they truly were. But when we look at scripture, what we do know is that Israel defeated Midian with just 300 people. And if Israel could defeat Midian with just 300 people and Midian had thousands of people, what does that say in the whole from the very beginning? That the issue was never about numbers. The issue was always about perspective. That the issue was never that Gideon was weak. The issue that Gideon was able to be thought that he was made to think that he was weak. And I wonder if the issue with you is not that you're insignificant, it's just that the adversary has been able to get you to think that you're insignificant. Just been able to get you to think that you don't have a voice. Been able to get you to think that what you do doesn't matter. And if we are going to really get into the power that God has given us, there are 4 things that I see in the scripture that we must be willing to do. The first thing is that we must be able to embrace our true self. Embrace your true self. What am I saying? Verse 12 says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." That points me to this, that it's never too late to change what you call yourself and how you see yourself. It's never too late to change what you call yourself or what you see yourself. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But Gideon said that he was the least. In Souls of Black Folks, W.E.B. Du Bois talks about that we live in this constant world, or this constant stream of double consciousness, that we are going back and forth between our identities. Especially as people of color, we go back and forth. But even as Christians, we go back and forth between our identity. That you're trying to decide whether or not, what side of the fence are you going to stand on? You are always having the battle between what is right and what is wrong, what is Christ-centered and what is self-centered. It is a constant tension that you must always deal with. But if you are going to embrace your true self, then you got to be okay with people not liking the you that they see when it's time for you to speak truth to power. Embrace yourself. The second thing that you've got to do is you've got to allow yourself to wait with clarity. We're wrapping up our series called The Waiting Room. And in this series, we talked about that we want to teach you not only how to wait well, but how to wait whole. And part of that waiting now is that you must be willing to wait with clarity. What does that mean? It means that you've got to identify and recognize the situation that you're really in. Because here's the reality. Gideon said God abandoned him, but Gideon was talking to God's messenger. And if God really abandoned Gideon and the children of Israel, why would God send a messenger to really talk about who Gideon's true identity was? Identify where you really are. Wait for clarity. The other thing that we have to recognize is that Gideon was actually in the promised land. If God had abandoned them, why would God allow them to stay in the place that God promised them? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the fact that God has put you in a position and allowed you to keep the position that God promised you, even though you didn't do what God asked you to do? Just because you feel the pressure doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. And sometimes we yell abandonment, but it's really not abandonment. It's just perspective changing. And what Gideon didn't do was understand the position that he was in. Yes, it's difficult, but we call this difficult situation. Yes, God, you pulled us out of Egypt, but you also allowed us to remain in the promised land. Yes, God, our enemies attacked us, but they didn't destroy us. And so the second thing that we have to do is we have to wait with clarity. The third thing we have to do is we have to operate in confidence and not fear. Operate in confidence and not fear. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Here's the thing, when you operate in confidence and not fear, it keeps you from endangering resources and making irrational and illogical decisions. Why do I say that? Here's the reason why I say this. Number one, he was threshing wheat in a wine press. Why is that important? Well, if I'm an army and I'm attacking you, I'm going to want your wine and your wheat. I'm not just going to want one or the other. So he really wasn't protecting himself at all. It was just that he was doing it out of a way of fear, which just caused him to be actually not as productive as he could have been when it came to getting that wheat out. And so God finds him in a pit, because that is what a wine press was back then. God finds him in a pit. And while Gideon is in his pit of self-wallow, his pit of doubt, his pit of not being sure if what he is actually doing is going to pan out, God finds him in his pit and pulls him out and speaks life over him. And what I need to ask is, there's someone that has been in the pit, that you've been doing things that's irrational and illogical, thinking that you're doing something that's productive and going to help you. In the meanwhile, you're doubting yourself and you're doubting God. And God is saying, you mighty warrior, come out. And the final thing that we must do is we must embrace that you're enough and that God has equipped you to be a champion because the cause is bigger than you. I'm done. God has equipped you to be a champion because the cause is bigger to you. Here's what Howard Thurman says. He says that there's an overmastering problem that the socially and politically disinherited always face. Under what terms is survival possible? It is the existential question that we see Gideon dealing with right now in this passage. He is having to decide under what terms is his survival possible. And I would argue that for us, right now, we have to understand and ask the question, under what terms is survival possible? But also recognize that we have the power to not just survive, that because we serve a God that delights in the and, we can survive and thrive. But you also have to realize that Christ didn't come just for you. Christ came for the world. That if you're in a position of influence, of power, of means, what cause are you going to champion? What course are you going to take up? If you're someone who needs someone to champion you, then you need to lean into what God said to Gideon, and that in you your strength is sufficient, because I will never leave you nor forsake you. It is the understanding that when we take on this mantle of knowing that we're enough and that we are a champion and that we're bigger than ourselves, then God is willing to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. This is what it means to live out the greatest commandment. When Jesus says, when they ask him, what is the greatest commandment of all the commandments? And he says, love the Lord thy God with all your heart. And then love your neighbor as you love yourself. It means that you're going to be a champion for not just your own rights, but for everyone else's. It's what we see happening in the Hebrew Bible when David, when he's sent on an errand to deliver food to his brothers, and he sees that Goliath has come out to the field and is challenging the children of Israel to battle, while at the same time downplaying God. And he says to them, you're letting this guy talk about God? Why is that important? Because during that time, you had this way that you can do battle. Instead of allowing everyone to die, you could choose a champion to walk out on the battlefield and take the place of all of the soldiers. One-on-one combat. The victor gets everything. And so you have Goliath coming out and talking to all of these adults and saying, who among you will challenge me? And this little boy, who was a shepherd, comes out on the battlefield and champions an entire people. To stand in the gap costs something. You're tired of what we're seeing in the news? It's going to cost something. You're tired of being tired? It's going to cost something. There's a quote that says, I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can do. What does that mean? It means that you don't have to be the biggest, the baddest. You don't have to have all of the money in the world. You just have to recognize that because you're enough, because you are enough, that you are called to do something. You're called to do something. You don't have to save the world. Christ did that for us. You don't have to go defeat an entire army. We have plenty of stories about that. But what is your something that you can do in your day-to-day life? It may be as simple as you saying a kind word to someone at work. But it also may be as simple as you writing a letter to someone saying, you signed a bill into legislature that allows people who are mentally disabled to carry firearms in public places in our state. And Governor Lee, you call yourself a Christian. You used the message of Christ-centered justice to get you elected. Yet you sign deals that kick the largest housing authority in Tennessee out on the street, and then say that you give them $200 for them to find equal housing. You sit around at family discussions and have these conversations with family members about what does it mean to be Christian, but you never share your side of the story. You only listen. And so you listen when they make homophobic comments. You listen when they make racist comments. You listen when they make sexist comments. You listen when they say that people who are impoverished just are lazy. You listen because you want to be comfortable. And you're not even being comfortable because you're uncomfortable in your own house. What are you willing to champion? And so we celebrate Martins and Malcolms. We celebrate the Harriets and the Sojourners. We celebrate the Diane Nashes. We celebrate the Baracks and the Michelles. We celebrate the Cannons and the Towns. We celebrate people that were willing to stand in the gap for other people, and we're not willing to do the same ourselves. And aren't you tired of just being a sounding board? And so, here's the thing. We can stand to our feet. We're getting ready to close. Here's the thing, that we are not called in the Christian faith to just be a faith where you are always passive. That is a misconception that we need to break now. We say that Christ says for us to turn the other cheek. That was about survival. We also see time and time again where Christ is standing up for those that can't stand up for themselves. That is what Christ did when he stood up for the woman that was accused of adultery. That is what Christ did when he healed the disabled. That is what Christ did when he stopped people from going through and talking about why people can't give. That is what Christ did. Christ stood in the gap. And what we have to realize is that the transformation that we experience from the inside, from being in relationship with Christ, yes, that's individual, but our representation that happens externally is communal. And if you have truly been transformed by the gospel, truly been transformed by the words that Christ has said, which is love thy neighbor, then how can you represent Christ as a passive Christian? Do something. Say something. Stop being silent. Because you're enough. And I know this isn't the type of message that is always being preached now. It's not even the type of message that I preach. But I just believe that we've got to stop focusing so much on the individual and start focusing on the community. We've got to stop asking God about me, and start asking God, how can we be a resource for we? Because you're enough. So let's pray. God, we just thank you. We thank you because we're enough. We thank you because you are showing us as a church where we're supposed to champion and where we're supposed to be. We thank you that you have placed the purpose on our life to be a trustworthy community where people grow in relationship with you and each other, God. And we just ask that in this moment, that those whose hearts you're pulling on for transformation, that they say yes. We thank you for the Gideons that are in this community that are willing to do the work, that may not necessarily even see that they're mighty warriors, but you speak it over their life. And so we just ask that you send an angel to them to speak to them what you've already said to us. In your son Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
It's all about